Some NBA players had everything: the talent, the opportunity, the future. But ego whispered lies they believed, and one by one, it devoured them whole. These are their stories. Let the darkness settle. Coney Island, Brooklyn, February 20th, 1977. A child was born who would carry the hopes of an entire neighborhood on his shoulders. His name was Stephon Marbury. And from the moment he could dribble a basketball, it was clear he was different. The courts of Coney Island had produced legends before, but Marbury had something special. A quickness that defied logic, handles that made defenders look foolish, and a confidence that bordered on something else entirely. By the time he reached Lincoln High School, Marbury was already a New York legend. He led his team to multiple championships, and college scouts lined up like pilgrims at a shrine. He chose Georgia Tech, where he spent just 1 year before declaring for the NBA draft. In 1996, he was selected 4th overall by the Milwaukee Bucks, then immediately traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was 19 years old, and the world was his. In Minnesota, Marbury found himself playing alongside Kevin Garnett, a player who would become one of the greatest power forwards in NBA history. The two formed an electrifying partnership. Marbury was named to the all-rookie first team, averaging 15.8 points and 7.8 assists per game. The future looked impossibly bright. Minnesota had two young stars, both hungry, both talented enough to carry a franchise for the next decade. But something was wrong, something that wouldn't become clear until it was too late. Marbury couldn't accept being second to anyone, not even Kevin Garnett. In interviews, he spoke about wanting to be the man, about needing to have a team built around him, about deserving the spotlight that Garnett was receiving. By 1999, just 3 years into his career, Marbury demanded a trade. He wanted out of Minnesota. He wanted his own team, his own city, his own throne. The Timberwolves, seeing the writing on the wall, obliged. They traded him to the New Jersey Nets. In New Jersey, Marbury blossomed statistically. He averaged 23.9 points and 7.6 assists in his first season, earning his first All-Star selection. The next year, he made the All-Star team again. He was proving his point. He could be the man. But the Nets weren't winning, and Marbury's ego wasn't satisfied. After just 2 seasons, he was traded again, this time to the Phoenix Suns. In Phoenix, the pattern continued. Individual success, team dysfunction, and an ego that demanded constant feeding. By 2004, Marbury got what he thought he always wanted: a return home to New York. The Knicks offered him a massive contract and the keys to Madison Square Garden. The kid from Coney Island was coming home as a conquering hero. It should have been the perfect ending to the story.
Instead, it became a nightmare. Marbury's tenure with the Knicks was marked by chaos from the beginning. He feuded with head coach Larry Brown, a Hall of Fame coach who had won championships at both the college and professional levels. Brown tried to implement a system, tried to instill discipline, tried to make Marbury understand that basketball was a team game. Marbury refused to listen. He wanted to play his way, on his terms, with no interference from anyone. The relationship deteriorated so badly that Brown was fired after just 1 season. Isaiah Thomas, the Knicks general manager and eventual head coach, tried to reach Marbury, but the dysfunction continued. The Knicks were losing, Marbury was clashing with teammates, and the media circus in New York was relentless. Then, on December 2nd, 2007, tragedy struck in a way no one could have predicted. The Knicks were playing the Phoenix Suns at Madison Square Garden. During the game, Marbury learned that his father, Don Marbury, had suffered a massive heart attack and died. Stephon was on the court when his world collapsed. He finished the game scoring 23 points, but something broke inside him that night, something that would never fully heal. In the months and years that followed, Marbury spiraled. His Starbury sneaker brand, which had been launched with noble intentions to provide affordable basketball shoes to kids, began to fail. His relationship with the Knicks became toxic. He was eventually benched, then removed from the team entirely. In 2009, He played just 3 games with the Boston Celtics before leaving the NBA for good. He was 32 years old.
Years later, in a 2015 interview, Marbury opened up about the darkest period of his life. He admitted that after leaving the NBA, he had contemplated suicide. The depression was overwhelming, the sense of failure crushing. The kid from Coney Island, who was supposed to conquer the world, had instead lost everything: his career, his reputation, his sense of self. Marbury would eventually find redemption in China, where he became one of the most beloved foreign players in basketball history. He won 3 CBA championships with the Beijing Ducks and had a statue erected in his honor. The Chinese fans loved him in a way that American fans never had. But his NBA legacy remains forever marked by the ego that wouldn't let him share the spotlight, the pride that demanded he be the man at the cost of everything else. Over 13 seasons in the NBA, Stephon Marbury averaged 19.3 points and 7.6 assists per game. He was a 2-time All-Star and a 2-time All-NBA selection. He had all the talent in the world. But when you ask NBA fans about Stephon Marbury, they don't talk about his accomplishments. They talk about what could have been, what should have been. If only ego hadn't whispered those lies. If only he had been willing to share the stage. Latrell Sprewell was born on September 8, 1970, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. By the time he reached the NBA in 1992 as the 24th overall pick by the Golden State Warriors, he had developed a reputation as an explosive scorer with a competitive fire that burned intensely. Over his first 5 seasons, Sprewell established himself as one of the premier shooting guards in the league. He was a 4-time NBA All-Star and made the All-NBA First Team in 1994. His career average of 18.3 points, 4.1 rebounds, and 4 assists per game marked him as a complete player. But on December 1st, 1997, everything changed. The moment that would define Latrell Sprewell's career, his legacy, and his life had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with violence. It was a routine practice at the Warriors' facility. Head coach P.J. Carlesimo, known for his intensity and demanding coaching style, was running the team through drills. Carlesimo criticized Sprewell's passing, telling him to put a little mustard on his throws. Sprewell, already irritated, told the coach to keep his distance. Carlesimo, either not hearing the warning or choosing to ignore it, moved closer to Sprewell to continue his instruction. What happened next sent shockwaves through the NBA and the sports world at large. Sprewell grabbed Carlesimo by the throat with both hands and began choking him. Teammates later testified that the choking lasted between 7 and 10 seconds before assistant coaches and players could pull Sprewell off. The coach stumbled backward, gasping for air, shocked by the violence of the attack. But it wasn't over. Approximately 20 minutes later, after being ordered to leave practice, Sprewell returned to the gym. This time, he threw a punch at Carlesimo, connecting with the coach's face before being restrained again. During the altercation, Sprewell reportedly threatened to kill Carlesimo. The practice facility, usually filled with the sounds of bouncing basketballs and squeaking sneakers, fell into a stunned silence. The Warriors acted swiftly. They voided the remaining $23.7 million on Sprewell's contract, effectively ending his tenure with the team immediately. NBA Commissioner David Stern suspended Sprewell for 68 games, the second longest suspension in NBA history at that time. The message was clear: violence, especially against the coach, would not be tolerated under any circumstances. The incident raised uncomfortable questions about ego, authority, and the relationship between players and coaches. Sprewell's defenders argued that Carlesimo had been verbally abusive, that he had provoked the response through his aggressive coaching style. Critics countered that nothing, absolutely nothing, justified physical violence. The debate raged in sports media for months. But here's what's undeniable. In that moment, Sprewell's ego convinced him that he was above correction, above criticism, above the coach-player relationship that has existed since basketball began. His pride wouldn't allow him to accept instruction he didn't like. And in 7 seconds of rage, he destroyed everything he had built. Surprisingly, Sprewell got a second chance. In 1999, the New York Knicks signed him, and he played some of the best basketball of his career. That same year, the 8th-seeded Knicks made an improbable run to the NBA Finals, with Sprewell playing a crucial role. He seemed to have turned the page, seemed to have learned from his mistakes. The redemption arc was writing itself. Then, in 2004, after a successful stint with the Minnesota Timberwolves, Sprewell's ego destroyed him again. The Timberwolves offered him a 3-year contract extension worth $21 million. It was a fair offer for a player in his mid-30s, coming off a solid but not spectacular season. Most players would have been grateful for the security, for 3 more years to play the game they loved at the highest level. Sprewell turned it down. His reason? "I've got my family to feed." Those 6 words became infamous. Sprewell, who had already earned $97 million over his career, claimed that $21 million over 3 years, $7 million per year, wasn't enough to support his family. The statement revealed an ego so inflated, so disconnected from reality, that it bordered on delusion. The Timberwolves withdrew the offer. No other team stepped up with a better one. Sprewell played his final NBA game in 2005. He was 34 years old and still capable of contributing, but no team wanted to deal with his ego, his demands, his sense of entitlement. The aftermath was brutal. Sprewell lost his yacht to repossession. He defaulted on a $1.5 million mortgage. The man who had earned $97 million over his career saw his net worth plummet to approximately $150,000. The ego that told him $7 million per year wasn't enough cost him everything: his career, his wealth, his legacy. To this day, when NBA fans hear the name Latrell Sprewell, they don't think of the 4 All-Star selections or the finals run with the Knicks. They think of hands wrapped around a coach's throat. They think of, "I've got my family to feed." They think of one of the most spectacular self-destructions in sports history, all because ego convinced a man that he was worth more than anyone was willing to pay. Years later, Sprewell and Carlesimo reportedly had cordial conversations, but there was never a real apology, never genuine reconciliation. The coach moved on with his career. Sprewell faded into obscurity, occasionally appearing in the news when his financial troubles became public. The silence around his name now is deafening. A once great player reduced to a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when ego is allowed to run unchecked. Gilbert Arenas was one of the most electrifying players of his generation. A 3-time NBA All-Star and 2-time All-NBA selection, Agent Zero was known for his clutch shooting, his confidence, and his larger-than-life personality. Fans loved his swagger, his willingness to take big shots, and his ability to back up his talk on the court. He averaged over 25 points per game in 3 consecutive seasons with the Washington Wizards, establishing himself as one of the premier scorers in the league. But on December 19, 2009, Gilbert Arenas made a decision that would end his career and cement his legacy as one of the most reckless, ego-driven players in NBA history. The story begins on a team flight, returning to Washington after a loss to the Phoenix Suns. Several Wizards players, including Arenas and teammate Javaris Crittenton, were playing a card game called Bure, a gambling game popular among NBA players. Reports vary on the exact amount disputed, with some sources citing $1,100 and others suggesting higher stakes. What's not in dispute is that the game ended badly. Arenas and Crittenton argued about the gambling debt. Tensions escalated. According to later testimony, threats were made. Arenas allegedly said, "I'll see you at practice, and you know what I do." Crittenton responded with his own threats. The plane ride, which should have been a time for the team to decompress after a loss, became a powder keg of masculine ego and barely contained rage. 2 days later, on December 21st, Gilbert Arenas arrived at the Verizon Center for practice. In his locker, he had placed 4 handguns, all unloaded, according to his later claims. He took those guns and laid them in front of Javaris Crittenton's locker. He included a note that read, "Pick one." Arenas would later claim that he was trying to make a joke, that he had brought the guns from his home because he wanted them out of the house after his daughter was born. He insisted the guns were unloaded, that he never intended to use them, that the whole thing was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But Javaris Crittenton didn't see it as a joke. Crittenton pulled out his own gun, this one fully loaded, cocked it, and pointed it directly at Gilbert Arenas. Teammates fled the locker room in terror. The situation had escalated from a card game dispute to a potential shooting in a matter of seconds. Only the intervention of teammates and staff prevented what could have been a tragedy. The story remained private for several days, known only to the team and a select few within the organization. But on December 24th, the Washington Post broke the story. The NBA world reacted with shock and horror. Guns in a locker room? Players pointing weapons at each other? This was beyond any scandal the league had dealt with before. Commissioner David Stern acted quickly, but not before Gilbert Arenas made one more catastrophically stupid decision. On the night of January 5, 2010, just before Stern announced an indefinite suspension, the Wizards played the Philadelphia 76ers. During pre-game introductions, with his teammates huddled in a circle, Arenas made gun gestures with his fingers, pretending to shoot his teammates in a joking manner. The cameras caught it all. The gesture, meant to be humorous, instead showed a man completely disconnected from the gravity of his situation. The next day, Stern suspended Arenas indefinitely without pay. The suspension would eventually be set at 50 games, the remainder of the 2009 to 2010 season. Arenas pleaded guilty to felony weapons possession and served 30 days in a halfway house. The suspension cost him nearly $10 million in salary, money he would never recover. But the real cost was his career. In December 2010, the Wizards traded Arenas to the Orlando Magic using the amnesty provision, essentially paying him to go away. He played just 49 games in Orlando before being waived. He signed with the Memphis Grizzlies and later played in China, but the Gilbert Arenas, who had once been one of the most feared scorers in the NBA, was gone. In later interviews, Arenas admitted that the gun incident wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. He casually mentioned that he had pointed guns at teammates before, that it was just how he joked around. The admission was stunning. This wasn't an isolated incident born from a heated moment. It was a pattern of behavior from someone whose ego told him that normal rules, normal boundaries, normal considerations of safety didn't apply to him. Gilbert Arenas retired from professional basketball in 2012. He was 30 years old. He had earned over $160 million in his career, been named to 3 All-Star teams, and twice been selected to the All-NBA team. He should have had another 5 to 7 years in the league, maybe more as a sixth man or role player. Instead, his career was over, destroyed by ego, by recklessness, by the belief that he was above consequence. Today, Arenas has reinvented himself as a social media personality and podcast host. He's funny, insightful, and often self-deprecating about his past mistakes. But when NBA fans hear his name, they don't think about the nights he scored 40 or 50 points. They don't remember the clutch shots or the all-star selections. They remember guns in a locker room. They remember a man whose ego was so inflated that he thought bringing weapons to an NBA facility was acceptable. They remember one of the most talented players of his generation throwing it all away because he couldn't control himself. The Washington Wizards facility is quiet now when players arrive for practice. Lockers are searched, security is tighter, the rules are clearer. All because of one day when Gilbert Arenas decided that his ego was more important than his career,
his teammates' safety, or his own future? The echoes of that decision still reverberate through the league, a reminder of how quickly everything can be lost.
When Derek Coleman was selected first overall by the New Jersey Nets in the 1990 NBA draft, expectations were sky high. Born June 21, 1967 in Mobile, Alabama, Coleman had dominated college basketball at Syracuse University. He was compared to Karl Malone and Charles Barkley, two players who would go on to become NBA legends and Hall of Famers. Scouts raved about Coleman's rare combination of skills. He could score inside, shoot three-pointers, handle the ball like a guard, and pass with vision. At 6 feet 9 inches and 230 pounds, he was the complete package. In his rookie season, Coleman proved the scouts right. He averaged 18.4 points and 10.3 rebounds per game, winning the NBA Rookie of the Year award in 1991. The next season, he improved even further, averaging 20.7 points and over 10 rebounds per game. In 1994, he was selected to the NBA All-Star team. Over his career, he averaged 16.5 points and 9.3 rebounds per game, solid numbers that reflected consistent production. But here's what the numbers don't tell you. Derek Coleman could have been so much more, should have been so much more. He had the talent to be the best power forward of his generation, maybe of all time. Instead, he became one of the most notorious underachievers in NBA history, a cautionary tale about what happens when ego convinces you that talent alone is enough.
The problem started almost immediately. Teammates noticed that Coleman didn't practice with intensity. He would go through the motions, doing just enough to avoid getting in trouble, but never pushing himself. Former teammates later said that Coleman only played hard enough to ensure his next paycheck. Once he got his money, the effort disappeared. Sports Illustrated wrote a damning article stating that Derek Coleman could have been the best power forward ever, but his attitude and work ethic prevented him from reaching his potential. Coleman skipped practices with regularity. He refused to enter games when coaches called his number, sitting on the bench with a defiant expression. He publicly criticized his coaches, questioning their strategies and decisions in interviews. He protested team dress codes, showing up in casual clothes when the team required suits. He feuded with teammates over petty issues, creating divisions in the locker room. The Nets, who had built their future around Coleman, watched helplessly as their franchise player sabotaged himself. In 1995, after just 5 seasons, the Nets had seen enough. They traded Coleman to the Philadelphia 76ers, hoping a change of scenery would wake him up. It didn't. Coleman arrived at training camp 30 pounds overweight, clearly having done nothing to maintain his conditioning over the summer. He was constantly injured, knee surgery, sprained ankles, strained back, and teammates whispered that the injuries were convenient excuses to avoid playing hard. Coach Paul Silas, who coached Coleman in Charlotte, publicly acknowledged that Coleman's attitude posed serious problems for the team. Other coaches said similar things, sometimes on the record, sometimes off. But Coleman never changed. His ego told him that he was talented enough to coast, that he didn't need to work as hard as everyone else, that his natural gifts would carry him through.
They didn't. Coleman bounced around the league, playing for Charlotte, Detroit, and back to Philadelphia. In 2004, he was on the Indiana Pacers roster when the infamous Malice at the Palace occurred, a massive brawl between players and fans that resulted in some of the longest suspensions in NBA history. Coleman was suspended for his role in the incident, another black mark on a resume increasingly defined by controversy rather than accomplishment. Off the court, Coleman's troubles multiplied. According to research documented in various reports about NBA crime statistics, Coleman holds an unfortunate distinction as having one of the highest numbers of arrests among NBA players, with 7 documented incidents. The details of these arrests varied, but the pattern was clear. A man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. The financial reckoning came in 2010 when Coleman filed for bankruptcy. Despite earning millions of dollars over his NBA career, he had squandered it all. He owed money to more than 90 creditors. His real estate ventures had failed. His investments in businesses, including a donut shop and a pizza parlor, had collapsed. The money was gone, wasted by ego and poor decisions.
Coleman retired from professional basketball and faded from public view. Occasionally, he appears in the news, sometimes for charity work, including a notable effort helping victims of the Flint water crisis, where he drove 65 miles daily to bring clean water to families in need. These moments of redemption are important, reminders that people can change and grow. But his basketball legacy remains forever stained by the ego and laziness that prevented him from becoming what he should have been. Scouts, coaches, and teammates who watched Coleman all say the same thing. He could have been the greatest power forward in NBA history. The talent was there. The opportunity was there. Everything was there except the willingness to work, to push through adversity, to put the team before himself. His ego whispered that talent was enough, that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone, that he was above the grind that every great player must embrace. And now, when NBA historians talk about the greatest power forwards ever, they mention Tim Duncan, Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, Kevin Garnett, and others. Derek Coleman's name doesn't make the list. Not because he lacked talent, but because ego convinced him he didn't need to use it. The silence around his career is its own condemnation. A player so talented that he should be remembered as one of the all-time greats, instead remembered only as the first overall pick who stopped trying.
The stories of individual players destroyed by ego are tragic enough on their own. But there's a hidden cost that's often overlooked: the way ego destroys entire teams, preventing collective success and poisoning the chemistry that separates championship contenders from mediocre squads. In the 2013 to 2014 NBA season, researchers conducted a fascinating study on narcissism in professional basketball. They analyzed 396 players' Twitter accounts, coding 34,914 tweets for narcissistic content. What they found was stunning. Teams with high narcissism scores performed significantly worse over the course of the season than teams with lower scores. The Charlotte Bobcats had the lowest narcissism score among all teams studied that season. Forecasts predicted they would win approximately 26 games. Instead, they won 43 games and made the playoffs, a 17-game improvement over expectations. The low-ego roster found ways to work together to improve as the season progressed, to maximize their collective talent, even though they lacked individual superstars. On the opposite end, the New York Knicks had the highest narcissism score that season. They were forecast to win 49 games based on their talent level. They won only 37 and missed the playoffs entirely, a 12-game decline from expectations. The roster was loaded with talented individuals, but their egos prevented them from functioning as a cohesive unit. The research concluded something that coaches have known instinctively for decades. Teams with narcissists can't build chemistry. High-ego players prevent teams from learning and improving together because they're too focused on individual statistics, personal glory, and protecting their own image. When a play breaks down, they blame teammates. When the team loses, they point fingers. When success comes, they claim credit. This pattern destroys trust, and without trust, teams cannot function at the highest level. The pattern repeated across different sports. Research on World Cup soccer teams showed similar results. Teams with more individual superstars often had worse coordination and performed below expectations. The ego-driven stars couldn't sacrifice individual glory for team success, and the collective suffered as a result. Think about the greatest dynasties in NBA history. The Boston Celtics of the 1960s, with Bill Russell leading the way. The Showtime Lakers of the 1980s, where Magic Johnson elevated everyone around him. The Chicago Bulls of the 1990s, where Michael Jordan's competitiveness drove teammates to be better. The San Antonio Spurs of the 2000s, where Tim Duncan's humility set the tone. All of these teams had superstars, but those superstars checked their egos at the door. They understood that basketball is a team game, that 5 players working together will always beat 5 individuals working separately. Now think about talented teams that never won championships. The early 2000s Sacramento Kings, loaded with talent, but plagued by individual egos. The Jailblazers, Portland Trailblazers teams where ego and off-court issues prevented championship success. These teams had enough talent to win titles, but ego poisoned the chemistry before they could reach their potential.
The cost isn't just measured in wins and losses. It's measured in careers cut short, in locker room divisions that take years to heal, in young players who learned the wrong lessons from veteran teammates. When a high-ego player demands special treatment, every other player on the roster notices. When that player skips practice or openly criticizes the coach, it sends a message. The rules don't apply to everyone. And once that message takes hold, team culture collapses. Coaches spend countless hours trying to manage egos, trying to keep talented but difficult players happy while maintaining team standards. It's exhausting work, and it often fails. Because ego, by its nature, is insatiable. It always demands more playing time, more shots, more credit, more money, more attention. And no matter how much you give, it's never enough. The hidden cost of ego extends beyond the court. Franchises waste years building around talented but high-ego players only to watch those teams implode. Fans become disillusioned, attendance drops, and the franchise's reputation suffers. Other free agents don't want to sign with teams known for dysfunction. The poison spreads, infecting every aspect of the organization. And all of it, every loss, every conflict, every wasted opportunity stems from individuals who believed they were above the team, who thought their talent exempted them from the standards everyone else had to meet, who let ego convince them that they were more important than the collective. The research proves what coaches have always known. Ego doesn't just ruin individual careers. It destroys teams, franchises, and entire cultures. And once the damage is done, it takes years to rebuild. Allen Iverson was one of the most electrifying players to ever step on an NBA court. The first overall pick in the 1996 draft, standing just 6 feet tall and weighing 165 pounds, Iverson defied every conventional wisdom about what an NBA superstar should look like. He was an 11-time All-Star, the 2001 NBA MVP, and a 4-time scoring champion. Over his career, he averaged 26.7 points per game, one of the highest scoring averages in NBA history. Iverson's crossover dribble was legendary. His fearlessness driving to the basket against much larger defenders was inspiring. His cultural impact extended far beyond basketball, influencing fashion, music, and the way an entire generation viewed the sport. He was the answer to every question about whether a small guard could dominate in a league of giants. And for years, he proved that he could. But there was always another question, one that Iverson refused to answer. Could he put his ego aside for the good of the team?
The most famous moment of Iverson's career, more famous than any shot he hit or game he won, came on May 7, 2002. Iverson sat at a press conference table, frustrated after the Philadelphia 76ers season had ended in disappointment. A reporter asked about his commitment to practice. Iverson's response became one of the most infamous rants in sports history. "We're talking about practice, not a game, not a game, not a game. We're talking about practice." The rant continued for several minutes, with Iverson repeating the word practice 22 times. He made it clear that he viewed practice as beneath him, as something that didn't deserve his full effort or attention. After all, he was the answer. He was the MVP. He was the guy who scored 40 points in games while other players sat on the bench. Why should he have to practice like everyone else? The rant revealed everything about Iverson's ego. He genuinely believed that his talent exempted him from the standards that applied to his teammates. While other players arrived early to work on their game, Iverson felt that such work was unnecessary for someone of his caliber. While coaches preached that practice was where teams built chemistry and refined their systems, Iverson saw it as a waste of his time.
His coach, Larry Brown, tried desperately to reach him.
Brown was a Hall of Fame coach who had won championships at both the college and professional levels. He knew what it took to build a winner. But Brown had to treat Iverson with what he called kid gloves, constantly managing the star's ego to keep him engaged. According to multiple sources, Iverson would curse out Brown every single time the coach removed him from a game, regardless of the reason. The disrespect was constant and public, undermining Brown's authority with the entire team. Despite the dysfunction, Iverson led the 76ers to the NBA Finals in 2001. They lost to the Los Angeles Lakers in 5 games, but Iverson's performance, especially his 48-point outburst in Game 1, was legendary. It seemed to validate his approach. Talent alone could carry you to the pinnacle of the sport. Except it couldn't. Not all the way. The 2001 Finals would be the closest Iverson ever came to a championship. In the years that followed, the 76ers declined. Iverson's relationship with Brown deteriorated further until Brown finally left the organization. In 2006, the Sixers grew tired of managing Iverson's ego and traded him to the Denver Nuggets. In Denver, Iverson initially thrived, but his refusal to accept a reduced role eventually became a problem there too. By 2008, he was traded again, this time to the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons' stint lasted just 20 games before both sides agreed to part ways. Iverson then had a brief 3-game stint with the Memphis Grizzlies that ended with him walking away from the team.
The problem was simple. Iverson still viewed himself as the answer, as the player who deserved unlimited playing time and touches. But he was now in his mid-30s. His athleticism had declined, and teams needed him to accept a reduced role as a sixth man or role player. His ego wouldn't allow it. Multiple teams offered Iverson minimum salary contracts to come off the bench. These were legitimate offers that would have extended his career and given him a chance to win a championship as a contributing piece. Iverson turned them all down. He couldn't accept that his time as a star was over, couldn't stomach the idea of entering games in the second quarter instead of starting, couldn't handle the attention not being focused on him. So instead, he left the NBA entirely. His last game was on February 20th, 2010, with the Sixers, the team that had drafted him 14 years earlier. He was 34 years old and still capable of playing, but his ego wouldn't let him accept the only roles available to him. Iverson attempted a comeback with the Sixers in 2010, but played just 3 games before retiring permanently. He had one more opportunity in 2011 when the Turkish team Beşiktaş signed him, but he quit after just 4 games, complaining about everything from the hotel to the practice schedule. The sad truth is that Allen Iverson had the talent and skill to play several more years in the NBA. He could have come off the bench for a contending team, providing scoring punch and veteran leadership. He could have won the championship that eluded him his entire career. But his ego, the same ego that made him fearless against larger defenders, wouldn't let him accept that his role had changed.
Today, Iverson is in the Hall of Fame, celebrated for his incredible individual achievements. But when historians talk about the greatest players who never won a championship, his name always comes up. And the reason is always the same: ego. The answer to every question was always, "It's about me." And in basketball, a team sport played 5-on-5, that answer is never enough. Derek Coleman wasn't the only first overall pick whose ego destroyed his career. The NBA is littered with talented players who shared the same fatal flaw, believing they were above the work, above the team, above the game itself. Oliver Miller was selected 22nd overall by the Phoenix Suns in 1992. At 6 feet 9 inches, Miller had incredible skills for a big man. He could pass like a point guard and had soft touch around the basket. But Miller's weight became a constant issue. Teammates reported seeing him arrive at practice eating McDonald's, his weight ballooning over 300 pounds. He showed up to training camps out of shape year after year. His ego told him that talent was enough, that he didn't need to maintain professional conditioning. He played just 8 seasons in the NBA, bouncing between 6 different teams before washing out of the league at age 29. He should have played 15 years. His ego cost him half his career.
Kwame Brown was the first overall pick in 2001, selected by the Washington Wizards when Michael Jordan was the team's president. Brown was the first player ever drafted number 1 directly out of high school. The pressure was immense, the expectations crushing. But instead of working to meet those expectations, Brown's ego made him unwilling to accept coaching or criticism. He was notoriously sensitive, unable to handle Jordan's demanding coaching style. He never developed the low post game scouts predicted, never became the defensive anchor the Wizards needed. Over 12 NBA seasons, Brown averaged just 6.8 points and 5.9 rebounds per game. Statistical production that would be acceptable for a late second-round pick, but is catastrophic for a first overall selection. He became one of the biggest draft busts in NBA history, not because he lacked talent, but because his ego wouldn't let him be coached, wouldn't let him accept that he needed to improve. Every coach who worked with Brown said the same thing. He had all the physical tools, but none of the mental toughness or coachability required to succeed. Jason Williams, known as White Chocolate, was drafted 7th overall in 1998. He had some of the most incredible ball handling skills ever seen, capable of passes that seemed to defy physics. But Williams believed his street ball style should supersede conventional basketball. He made highlight reel passes when simple plays would have been more effective. He ran his mouth to opponents, fans, and referees constantly. He accumulated technical fouls and ejections at an alarming rate.
Williams also had repeated drug suspensions that derailed his career. His ego told him the rules about substance abuse didn't apply to him, that he could live however he wanted and still perform at the highest level. He was wrong. Williams bounced between teams, never staying anywhere long enough to build chemistry or trust. He played just 12 seasons before retiring, his career defined more by what could have been than what actually was. The pattern across all these players is identical. Immense talent, early success, then ego whispering lies, you're above the work, above the coaching, above the standards everyone else must meet. And one by one, they believed those lies. One by one, their careers crumbled. One by one, they joined the ranks of the forgotten, players who should be remembered as greats, but are instead cautionary tales. Some players' egos didn't just destroy their own careers, they endangered lives. On December 9, 1977, during a game between the Houston Rockets and Los Angeles Lakers, one of the most brutal acts of violence in sports history occurred. Rockets player Rudy Tomjanovich was running down the court when a fight broke out behind him. He turned to act as a peacemaker. At that exact moment, Lakers forward Kermit Washington threw a punch with his full force.
The punch connected with Tomjanovich's face, and the sound echoed through the arena. Witnesses said it sounded like a watermelon being dropped on concrete. Tomjanovich collapsed instantly. His face was shattered, his skull was fractured, he was leaking spinal fluid. Doctors later said he was minutes away from death, that if the damage had been slightly worse, he would have died on the court. Washington was suspended for 26 games, at the time the longest suspension in NBA history for an on-court incident. But the real punishment was what came after. Washington's reputation was destroyed forever. Despite being a talented player who averaged over 9 points and 8 rebounds per game, he would forever be remembered as the man who nearly killed Rudy Tomjanovich. Washington later said he didn't intend to hurt Tomjanovich that badly, that it was a reaction born from instinct and fear. But the incident revealed an ego-driven belief that physical dominance could solve problems, that violence was an acceptable response to conflict. Tomjanovich's playing career was effectively ended by the punch. He missed the rest of that season and was never the same player again. One moment of ego-fueled rage destroyed 2 careers. Then there was the malice at the Palace, November 19, 2004. Indiana Pacers versus Detroit Pistons. With less than a minute left in a game the Pacers were winning comfortably, Pistons center Ben Wallace
took exception to a hard foul by Ron Artest, who later changed his name to Meta World Peace. Wallace shoved Artest hard in the face. Artest, instead of retaliating, lay down on the scorer's table, seemingly trying to defuse the situation. Then a fan threw a cup of beer that hit Artest in the face. What happened next was unprecedented. Artest charged into the stands, attacking fans. His teammate Steven Jackson followed. Other Pacers players joined in. Fans fought back, throwing chairs and food. The scene descended into complete chaos. Players fighting fans, fans fighting players, security unable to restore order. The images were broadcast live on national television, shocking the entire sports world. Artest was suspended for 86 games, the longest suspension for an on-court incident in NBA history at the time. Jackson received 30 games. Other players received suspensions ranging from 1 to 15 games. The Pacers, who had been championship contenders, never recovered. The incident cost them their best players during the crucial part of the season and destroyed any chemistry they had built. But beyond the basketball consequences, the malice at the Palace revealed something darker. A culture where ego-driven players believed they were above consequence, where physical violence was an acceptable response to disrespect. Artest's ego told him that a fan throwing a cup justified charging into the stands and attacking people. That belief, shared by his teammates who followed him, nearly caused serious injuries or worse. Years later, Artest admitted he had been drinking cognac at halftime of games during that period of his career. The admission explained much, but excused nothing. His ego told him that he could drink alcohol during games, fight fans in the stands, and still be a professional athlete. The delusion was staggering. These weren't accidents or split-second mistakes. They were the products of unchecked egos, of men who believed rules didn't apply to them, that their talent gave them permission to be violent. The NBA paid in blood, reputation, and billions of dollars in lost revenue. The league implemented strict security measures, banned alcohol sales in certain sections, and created detailed protocols for player-fan interactions, all because ego convinced players they were above the basic standards of civilized behavior. Not every ego-destroyed career ends in complete ruin. Some players found redemption, though the paths were long and painful. Stephon Marbury's redemption came in China. After his NBA career ended in bitterness and failure, Marbury signed with the Beijing Ducks of the Chinese Basketball Association in 2010. He was 33 years old, washed out of the NBA, battling depression and suicidal thoughts. Most people expected him to fail in China, too, to burn bridges there just as he had in America. Instead, something remarkable happened. Marbury embraced Chinese culture. He learned Mandarin. He treated his teammates with respect. He accepted coaching. He played team-first basketball. And he won. The Beijing Ducks won 3 CBA championships in 4 years, with Marbury winning Finals MVP awards. Chinese fans fell in love with him in a way American fans never had. In 2014, the Beijing government installed a statue of Marbury outside the team's arena, an honor previously reserved for Chinese heroes. A museum dedicated to Marbury opened in Beijing, displaying his shoes, jerseys, and personal items. He became so beloved that when he became a Chinese citizen in 2015, it was celebrated as a national event.
Marbury found what had eluded him in the NBA: peace. He learned to subordinate his ego to the team's needs. He discovered that being loved and respected felt better than being the man. His Chinese career doesn't erase his NBA failures, but it proves that redemption is possible for those willing to change. Gilbert Arenas also found a form of redemption, though different from Marbury's. After his NBA career ended, Arenas became a social media personality and podcast host. He's self-deprecating about his past mistakes, often joking about the gun incident and his career's collapse. His podcast, where he discusses basketball and interviews current players, has found a substantial audience.
He's funny, insightful, and surprisingly humble about his failures. But Arenas was 30 years old when his career effectively ended. He should have had another 5 to 7 years in the league, maybe longer as a role player. The redemption he found doesn't erase the years lost, the potential unfulfilled, the championship opportunities that vanished because he brought guns to a locker room. His podcast success is nice, but it's a poor substitute for what his basketball career should have been.
Derek Coleman also sought redemption in his own way. In 2015, during the height of the Flint, Michigan water crisis, Coleman drove 65 miles daily from his home to bring clean water to families affected by lead contamination. He didn't seek publicity for it, didn't make a show of his charity. He just did the work, helping people who needed help. The gesture was noble and important. It showed a man who had grown since his basketball career ended, who had learned that life was about more than personal glory. But it didn't change his basketball legacy. When people discuss the greatest what-ifs in NBA history, Coleman's name always comes up. A man who could have been the best power forward ever, reduced to a cautionary tale about ego and wasted talent. Latrell Sprewell never found real redemption. He and PJ Carlesimo reportedly had cordial conversations in later years, but there was never a genuine apology, never true reconciliation. Sprewell occasionally appears in the news when his financial troubles become public or when old teammates are interviewed about the infamous choking incident. But mostly, there's silence. A once great player faded into obscurity, remembered only for 7 seconds of violence and 6 words about feeding his family. The redemption arcs that exist are important. They prove that people can change, can grow, can learn from their mistakes. But they also highlight what was lost. Marbury could have won championships in the NBA if he'd learned earlier to put team first. Arenas could have been a first-ballot Hall of Famer if he'd controlled his impulses. Coleman could have been the greatest power forward in history if he'd applied himself. Sprewell could have been remembered as a champion if he'd controlled his temper and his pride.
Redemption is possible, but it cannot erase history. The years are gone. The opportunities vanished. The legacies are set. And all the charitable work, all the podcast success, all the Chinese championships cannot change the fundamental truth. Ego destroyed careers that should have been legendary. Looking back, the warning signs were always there. Every player whose career was destroyed by ego showed clear indicators of the disaster to come. But teams, coaches, and leagues ignored those signs, blinded by talent and potential. Stephon Marbury had a star tattoo prominently displayed on his bald head. He called himself Starberry, branding himself as something beyond a regular player. The narcissism was literally written on his body for everyone to see. He feuded with coaches as early as Minnesota, demanding trades when he didn't get his way. The pattern was established from the beginning, but teams kept giving him chances, kept building around him, kept hoping the ego would diminish. It never did. Gilbert Arenas called himself Agent Zero and made a show of his eccentricities. He would sleep in the locker room before games, claiming it was part of his routine. He made jokes about bringing guns to the arena years before the actual incident occurred. According to later reports, he had pointed guns at teammates before as part of what he considered harmless pranks. The violent tendencies were there, visible to anyone paying attention. But Arenas was scoring 30 points per game, so everyone looked the other way. Latrell Sprewell had a history of violence even before he choked PJ Carlesimo. In 1995, Sprewell fought teammate Jerome Kersey during practice. The fight was bad enough that Sprewell reportedly left practice, then returned with a 2x4 wooden plank, threatening to use it on Kersey. Some reports suggested he threatened to return with a gun. The Warriors knew Sprewell had anger management issues, knew he was prone to violence, knew he crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. They kept him anyway. 2 years later, he would choke a coach. Derek Coleman told Coach Bill Fitch to get out of my face during his rookie season and refused to enter a game. It was an act of blatant insubordination that would have gotten most players benched indefinitely or traded immediately. Instead, Coleman faced minimal consequences.
The message was clear. Talent excused behavior. Coleman took that message and ran with it for the rest of his career, continually testing boundaries, continually seeing what he could get away with. The answer was almost everything. The warning signs weren't subtle. They were neon bright indicators flashing problem ahead. But at every step, organizations made the same calculation. The talent outweighed the risk. They believed they could manage the ego, contain the dysfunction, channel the problematic behavior into productive energy. They were wrong every single time.
The pattern extended beyond individual players. Teams developed reputations for tolerating dysfunction in exchange for talent. The Jailblazers, Portland Trailblazers teams of the early 2000s had a roster filled with players who had legal troubles, attitude problems, and ego issues. The team was talented enough to contend for championships, but the dysfunction prevented success. The players fed off each other's bad behavior, creating a toxic culture where ego ran unchecked. Coaches who tried to implement discipline were undermined by front offices unwilling to support them. Larry Brown tried to coach both Allen Iverson and Stephon Marbury, establishing standards and demanding accountability. In both cases, the organization eventually chose the star over the coach. Brown, a Hall of Fame coach, was pushed out while the dysfunctional stars remained. The message to players league-wide was clear. If you're talented enough, you don't have to listen to anyone. The NBA itself sent mixed messages. It suspended players for violence, but often reduced those suspensions after appeals. It fined players for misconduct, but those fines were pocket change for millionaires. It instituted rules about conduct, but applied them inconsistently. The league wanted to maintain its image while also protecting its star attractions. That contradiction created an environment where ego flourished.
Looking back, everyone, teams, coaches, leagues, media, fans, shares some responsibility. We all saw the warning signs. We all knew the risks. But we wanted to believe that talent would be enough, that potential would be fulfilled, that problematic players would mature. We ignored the evidence of our own eyes because we wanted the story to have a different ending. It never did. The warning signs were there from the beginning, and we ignored every single one. The ego-driven collapse of NBA careers wasn't just about basketball. It was about complete financial ruin, about men who earned generational wealth and squandered it all. Latrell Sprewell earned $97 million over his NBA career. That's not $97 million in total income. That's just his NBA salary, not counting endorsements, appearance fees, or other income streams. In 2005, when his career ended, he should have been set for life. His children's children should have been set for life. Instead, within a few years, Sprewell had lost almost everything. His yacht was repossessed by the bank. His million-dollar home went into foreclosure. He defaulted on multiple loans and mortgages. Creditors came calling, and Sprewell had nothing to give them. The man who said $21 million over 3 years wasn't enough to feed his family saw his net worth plummet to approximately $150,000, less than many middle-class Americans have saved for retirement.
The collapse was systematic and entirely preventable. Sprewell invested in risky ventures without proper financial advice. He maintained a lifestyle appropriate for someone earning millions annually, even after his income disappeared. He made decisions based on ego, buying flashy cars, expensive jewelry, luxury items, rather than building long-term wealth. When reporters asked him about the financial troubles, Sprewell had no good answers. The ego that told him $7 million per year wasn't enough had also told him that planning for the future was unnecessary. Derek Coleman's story was similar. He filed for bankruptcy in 2010 despite earning tens of millions during his NBA career. Court documents showed he owed money to more than 90 different creditors. His real estate investments had failed. His business ventures, including a donut shop and a pizza parlor, had collapsed. The money was gone, evaporated like morning dew. Coleman had believed his playing career would last forever, that the checks would keep coming, that he could spend freely without consequences.
When his career ended earlier than expected, cut short by injury and his own poor conditioning, the financial foundation crumbled. He had no safety net, no backup plan, no savings to fall back on. Ego had convinced him he was special, that normal rules about saving and investing didn't apply. Reality proved otherwise. Stephen Marbury's financial troubles were tied to his Starbury sneaker brand. He had launched the brand with noble intentions, providing quality basketball shoes to kids for under $15 when most name-brand shoes cost over $100. The idea was lauded in the press, and Marbury was praised for his social consciousness. But the business model was flawed, the execution poor, and the company hemorrhaged money. By the time Marbury's NBA career ended, the brand was failing and millions of dollars had been lost.
The financial devastation extended to Gilbert Arenas as well. While his suspension cost him nearly $10 million in salary directly, the long-term impact was far greater. He signed a $111 million contract with the Washington Wizards in 2008, but after the gun incident, he was amnestied by the team. Future earning potential vanished. Endorsement deals evaporated. The trajectory from rising star to financial liability happened in months. The pattern across all these players is identical. They earned generational wealth and lost it because ego convinced them the money would keep flowing forever. They made terrible investments, spent extravagantly, and failed to plan for the inevitable end of their playing careers. When the money stopped coming in, they had nothing left. No skills, no education, no backup career. Just debt, regret, and the memory of millions that slipped through their fingers. Financial experts who study athlete wealth estimate that 60% of NBA players go broke within 5 years of retirement. The reasons are complex: bad investments, poor financial advice, expensive divorces, supporting large extended families. But ego plays a central role. Players believe they're immune to the mistakes that claim others. They think their wealth makes them invincible, that they can spend freely without consequence. And one by one, they learn the hard truth. Money runs out, especially when you're living like it never will.
The silence around these financial collapses is profound. These men once had everything: talent, fame, wealth, opportunity. Now they have court documents detailing their debts, news articles chronicling their foreclosures, and Wikipedia pages that list their career earnings alongside their bankruptcy filings. The contrast is stark, the fall complete. Ego didn't just cost them their careers, it cost them everything they'd ever earned. Behind every ego-driven career collapse is a human being suffering psychological damage that lasts long after the final game. Stephen Marbury's admission in 2015 that he had contemplated suicide was shocking in its honesty. Here was a man who had been worshipped in Brooklyn, who had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, who had achieved the dreams of millions of young basketball players, and he wanted to die. The depression that gripped Marbury after his NBA career ended was profound. His father's death in 2007, occurring during a game while Marbury was on the court, had shattered something fundamental inside him. The subsequent failures with the Knicks, the public ridicule, the sense that he had wasted his immense talents, all of it compounded into a psychological crisis that nearly cost him his life. In interviews, Marbury described feeling worthless, like he had let everyone down: his family, his city, himself. The ego that had driven him for so long had been built on external validation, on being the man, on hearing the crowd chant his name. When that validation disappeared, when the crowds booed instead of cheered, Marbury had no internal foundation to fall back on. His sense of self-worth was entirely tied to basketball success. Without it, he felt he had no reason to live.
Gilbert Arenas has spoken about his own psychological struggles, particularly around the gun incident. In podcast interviews, he's discussed how the suspension and its aftermath sent him into a dark place. He realized too late that his funny pranks and his harmless jokes had cost him his career.
The regret was overwhelming, but by the time he felt it, the damage was irreversible. Arenas has also discussed his upbringing, describing a childhood where he felt he had to be tough, had to project confidence, had to never show weakness. That mentality served him on the court, where confidence is crucial, but off the court, it prevented him from seeking help, from admitting mistakes, from recognizing that his behavior was destructive. By the time he understood what he'd lost, it was too late to get it back. Latrell Sprewell has largely disappeared from public life, rarely giving interviews or making public appearances. Those who have spoken with him report a man still grappling with the violence that defined his legacy. The 7 seconds he spent choking PJ Carlesimo haunt him, not because he regrets what he did, he's never fully apologized, but because he can't escape it. Every article about him mentions it. Every introduction includes it. His entire identity is tied to that moment of rage. The psychological toll of ego-driven career collapses extends beyond the players themselves. Their families suffer, children growing up without their fathers who are playing overseas or dealing with depression, spouses divorcing men who can't adjust to life after basketball, parents watching their sons waste opportunities they sacrificed everything to provide. The damage ripples outward, affecting everyone in the player's orbit.
Sports psychologists who work with athletes talk about the danger of linking self-worth entirely to performance. When your identity is basketball player and nothing else, what happens when basketball ends? The transition from professional athlete to regular citizen is difficult for everyone, but it's catastrophic for those whose egos have convinced them they're special, separate, above the concerns of normal people. The suicide rate among former professional athletes is higher than the general population. Depression, substance abuse, and financial stress all contribute. But underlying many of these issues is the psychological impact of losing the identity that ego built. When you've spent your entire life being told you're special, when crowds have chanted your name, when you've been treated like royalty, the return to ordinary life feels like death. And for some, that feeling becomes too much to bear. The psychological toll isn't always visible. Some former players seem fine on the surface, doing podcasts or making occasional public appearances, but beneath that surface, many are struggling with questions of identity, purpose, and self-worth. The ego that drove them to basketball success didn't prepare them for basketball failure. And now in their 30s and 40s, they're trying to figure out who they are without the game that defined them for so long.
The lights are off now. The arenas where these players once performed are filled with new voices, new stars, new stories. The crowds that once chanted their names have moved on, focusing their attention and adoration on the next generation. In the record books, their statistics remain. Points scored, rebounds grabbed, assists made. Cold numbers that tell only part of the story, that capture the talent but miss the tragedy. The NBA has seen countless talented players over its 70-plus-year history. Some became legends whose names echo through generations. Bill Russell with his 11 championships, Michael Jordan with his perfect finals record, LeBron James with his longevity and excellence. These players mastered not just the game, but themselves. They understood that basketball was bigger than individual glory, that legacy was built through sacrifice and team success, that ego had to be subordinated to something larger. Others became cautionary tales. Stephon Marbury, with his star tattoo and his need to be the man, bounced from team to team before finding redemption thousands of miles from home. Latrell Sprewell, whose 7 seconds of violence cost him everything, faded into obscurity with empty bank accounts and a legacy defined by rage. Gilbert Arenas, who thought bringing guns to a locker room was acceptable, watched his career end at 30. Derek Coleman, who could have been the greatest power forward ever, retired as one of the most notorious underachievers in sports history. Allen Iverson, talented enough to win MVPs but too prideful to accept a reduced role, left the NBA rather than come off the bench.
Their names carry weight, but it's the weight of regret.
When old fans gather to reminisce about basketball, these players are mentioned with sadness in their voices, with head shakes and sighs, with the universal lament, if only they had. If only they had listened to coaches. If only they had controlled their tempers. If only they had put the team first. If only they had been willing to work. If only ego hadn't whispered those lies. If only they had understood that talent alone was never enough. But they didn't. And now the only thing left is the haunting question that follows every wasted talent. What if? What if Marbury had stayed in Minnesota alongside Kevin Garnett? Could those two have won championships together, building a dynasty in an overlooked market? What if Sprewell had controlled his temper for 7 more seconds? Would he be remembered as a champion instead of a cautionary tale? What if Arenas had left his guns at home that December morning? Would he be heading to the Hall of Fame instead of podcasting about his failures? What if Coleman had applied himself, had treated his body like the temple it needed to be, had embraced the work required to be great? Could he have been better than Karl Malone? Better than Charles Barkley? Better than everyone? What if Iverson had accepted a bench role, sacrificing pride for the championship ring that eluded him his entire career? Would that ring make all the difference in how we remember him?
We'll never know. The moments passed, the opportunities vanished, the careers ended. All that remains are the statistics in record books and the memories of those who watched them play, and the overwhelming sense of loss, not just for what these players achieved, but for what they could have been. Ego promised them everything. It told them they were above the rules, beyond criticism, entitled to special treatment. It whispered that talent was enough, that hard work was for lesser players, that team success was secondary to personal glory. It convinced them that they deserved more shots, more money, more respect, more everything, regardless of what they gave in return. And one by one, ego took everything from them: their careers, their reputations, their wealth, their mental health, their place in history. What ego promised, it never delivered. What it demanded in return, it consumed completely. The NBA has learned from these failures, though the lessons are imperfectly applied. Teams hire sports psychologists to work with players on mental health and ego management. The league has programs to help players transition to life after basketball, to plan financially, to build identities beyond the game. Coaches are trained to recognize warning signs of destructive behavior and address them before they escalate. The culture has changed, slowly and incompletely, but changed nonetheless. But even with all these safeguards, new stories of ego-driven failure emerge. Different names, different circumstances, same fundamental pattern. Because ego is insidious. It adapts, finds new ways to whisper its lies, convinces each new generation that they're different, that they're the exception, that the rules that destroyed previous players don't apply to them.
And so the cycle continues. Talented players arrive in the NBA with dreams of greatness. Some achieve it through discipline, sacrifice, and team-first mentality. Others let ego guide them, believing its promises, following its path. And years later, we gather their stories, cataloging another group of what-ifs, adding new names to the list of wasted potential. Tonight, in darkened arenas across America, young players are practicing, dreaming of NBA glory. Some will make it, fewer still will become great, and a small number, blessed with transcendent talent but cursed with unchecked ego, will join this tragic roster of players who had everything and lost it all. Their warning echoes through basketball history, a cautionary tale passed down through generations. Talent opens doors, but ego slams them shut. Potential means nothing without discipline. Individual glory pales beside team success. And in the end, the players remembered as legends are those who mastered not just the game, but themselves. The others, the Marburys and Sprewells and Aronesses and Colemans and Iversons, exist in a different kind of immortality.
not celebrated in Hall of Fame speeches or championship parades, but remembered in whispered conversations about waste and loss. Their legacy is written not in championship banners, but in the silence that follows their names. The uncomfortable pause when someone mentions their talent. The sad headshake when someone says, "What could have been?"
That silence is the loudest sound of all. It echoes through empty arenas and quiet nights, a reminder of everything that was lost when ego convinced talented players that they were above the game they claimed to love. It's the sound of potential unfulfilled, opportunities wasted, careers destroyed by pride. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, you can still hear ego whispering its lies to the next generation, promising everything, delivering nothing, taking everything in return. Some will listen, some always do, and years from now we'll gather their stories too, adding new names to the tragic list of NBA legacies ruined by ego. The pattern will repeat because ego never dies, never learns, never stops. But perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere, a young player will hear these stories and recognize the warning. Will see the pattern and choose a different path. Will understand that greatness requires not just talent, but humility. Not just skill, but sacrifice. Not just confidence, but coachability. That player will build a different legacy, will win championships instead of regrets, will be remembered for what was achieved instead of what was wasted. Until then, the silence remains, heavy with loss, loud with lessons unlearned, eternal with the question that defines every ego-ruined career. What if they had just let go? What if ego hadn't won? We'll never know. And that silence, that unanswered question, that weight of wasted potential, it's the loudest sound in basketball history.